Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome and thank you all for joining us for today's webinar on steps towards measurement maturity and the future of evaluating communications. Today's event is co-hosted by the Nordic Alliance for Communication and Management, together with the European Association of Communication Directors, and is part of the Measurement Month initiative from the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communication, or AMEC for short. My name is Alexander Buhmann. I am an associate professor at the Norwegian Business School, associate professor for corporate communication, and I'm also the director of the Nordic Alliance for Communication and Management. Today's topic is of great importance, of great interest to many communication professionals globally, and it is great to see that so many of you have joined us for this session today. We see in our research that as communication budgets are growing, so does the pressure towards more mature approaches to measurement and towards more evidence-based practice. I want to show you a quick quote that comes out of one of the recent research projects I did together with a colleague in the US at the Department of State, where we talked to numerous comms professionals about their approach to measurements, about their challenges. And I feel that this quote, I feel sometimes like we are rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, puts very nicely in a nutshell the challenge that many professionals are experiencing. So one of the key challenges is not that not enough data is available, but often the challenge is to maturing measurement from being just an sort of an ad hoc rearranging of deck chairs to a more well-aligned, productive element of a strategic management and leadership approach. And this is exactly the angle and the perspective that we want to take today in today's webinar. And I'm really delighted to have so many five different esteemed measurement experts from around the world with us today, from the US, UK, Finland, Norway, and Germany. So this should be an exciting international webinar with many perspectives. And I'm going to introduce everyone in a short while when we get into the presentations. Before that, just a brief note on housekeeping. So please do submit your questions through the Q&A function. If you are wondering about anything, if you have questions or comments, just put them in there. We will collect them and we will address them after the presentations of our panelists. Also, as you will have noticed, we are recording today's session for further distribution afterwards. So the recording will be available on our website. But if you do want to ask questions but wish to stay anonymous, please just note so at your question, and we will, of course, respect that when we bring up questions. Each of our five panelists will present for about 5 minutes and give their insights on their perspectives on the measurement maturity topic, and we will then spend the second half of the webinar with a Q&A, with a discussion. Okay, so now, without further ado, we'll start with our first presentation from Sunita Menon from the US. Sunita is a global data ambassador in KPMG's International Global Chief Data Office, and also an adjunct professor at the University of Florida. And Sunita looks back on 25 plus years career as a global data executive within IBM. And she brings a wealth of experience in connecting data, technology, and technology with people to really build revenue and growth in organizations. Sunita today will deliver our bird's eye perspective from a little bit outside the communication field, exploring alternative models for measurement maturity and how business can evolve their thinking. Sunita, over to you.
Thank you. Could you allow screen sharing? Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining today. I'd love to talk to you about, give you a quick run of how data can be the bridge for PR and communications to the business. With data, you can connect to the business, you can have a seat at the table. So one of the things coming outside in from a communications perspective, with my background in data for other functions and for the enterprise as a whole, when I came into communications, I always heard this word measurement, and when it always meant data driven. When we say we are data driven, it meant the focus on measurements, but it's not. Data driven does not mean measurements, because measurement is meaningless if you don't have a careful data strategy. So I'd like to share with you today how other functions who've gone much ahead in data and AI compared to PR and communications, what have they done that you could also use so you could accelerate this journey? The reason why data and it gets very confused with, just limited to measurements is, turns out, this was in a Harvard Business Review in 2019, that this tendency to surrogate, to replace the strategy with metrics, it has a name. It's called surrogation, and it destroys company value. So in business, the reason to do metrics is to capture some underlying intangible goal. So it's good to figure out what is that goal. And that's what, so measurement is the means and not the ends. So one of the things I was surprised by is how the different PR communications organizations are at different levels of maturity when it comes to being data driven. So we use this capability maturity model in software development processes. So it triggered one day, and I thought, what would it look like for a data-driven PR communications function? What do those 5 stages look like? So here it is. Typically, companies that start with the PR function just focus on activity. You have press releases, you have crisis comms, you're good. Then they mature. As they mature, or if they have a strategic view of the organization, they became more campaign based, and data is there, but it's an afterthought, and they focus on campaign result and impressions. As they mature, or if they start with a strategic approach, then reputation becomes an objective, and they do come up with more diligence on research and social media analysis, and they look at how can we do this on a repeatable basis. And if they're committed, they establish reputation as their objective, and they're transformation focused, future focused, and now they look at data across everything. Let's not have data efforts in silos, but let's bring that together, and they become very proactive, and they do get a seat at the table. But the highly optimized would be that the purpose or a movement is their vision, a change is their vision, and then data is the starting point, not the ending point. And they bring data insights across all media types, earned, shared, owned, paid, everything together. And they have strategic focus on how they look at data, not just what happened, but what can happen. And this is leadership and excellence mode. So just throw that in, keep this framework in mind. And so if you look at the 6 critical design principles, design factors that a PR communications team can start with, is ask the right questions. Ask the right business questions. What is this that the business is trying to do? And then work backwards from that. If you ask compelling questions, you will have compelling insights from your data program. And aim for the full view of your audience. Your audience is not just customers and prospects. It's not just a ticket sales. It's not just how many people attended an event, but it's bigger. You, as communications, you have the entire stakeholder of the company as your audience. Prospects, employees, media, investors, analysts, partners, suppliers, and general population. Align your focus for data to the why of the business. Why is the business? What is the why of that business? Why are they in business? What is the purpose? And that's how you're going to change and movement. And aim for actionable insights. If you do a data program and you do a data analysis, and if you didn't get any action out of it, then it was just an experiment, which has its value. But make sure, ask the question, so what? What do I do with this report now? What do I do with this insight? What would I change differently? What would I think differently? And amplify your business storytelling with data. Storytelling is such a art and science when it comes to PR and communications, and how better to do that with data. So you have the left brain and the right brain coming together. Activate a data mindset. Ask questions with people in the company. It's like almost everybody will understand why they need to have the data mindset, which is starting with the data. You don't have to memorize these. You will have this information, but everything I've covered is in the article that was recently published in PR Daily. So I have the link here, whatever is covered, so you can go and read further. So with that, let me turn it back to Alex. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Sunita. And I think you certainly, I think, struck a nerve there with your emphasizing of data as the starting point and not the end point. Really also picking up a question that already came in from Ger Perboom there, where he mentioned that he would like to see a strong focus, of course, on this insights or learning element, and going away a little bit from just using measurement to show impact, right? So, and in your model, this was reflected, of course, by starting with questions, right? The very first step, making that about learning. Thanks so much, Sunita. Over to our next guest. So we have Stuart Bruce joining us from the UK. Stuart is an expert and consultant with a very long track record in measurement and evaluation. Stuart has been extensively involved in countless measurement and evaluation initiatives, also through the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communication, AMEC. Stuart is an, I think, excellent contributor today to take us from Sunita's view that was more outside in to an inside out view, a view on the practice in the communication field and how measurement and evaluations has developed over the decades here, and maybe what are our current and next challenges in this field. Stuart, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much. That was a really interesting presentation from Sunita, and I think she's kind of set the stage well for what we're going to be doing next. What I want to kind of do is take you through how far we've come on the measurement journey, but also to highlight how far we haven't come and what the next steps need to be. And I think in Sunita's presentation, she began to hint and began to talk about what some of those next steps should be that we should all be thinking about. So if you actually kind of look at kind of where we've come from, you know, you can go back to the 1770s, when I'm told that George Washington was obsessed by his press cuttings and kind of monitoring himself. And then if we kind of move forward into the 20th century, and it was quite interesting when we were talking about insight and the importance of using data and measurement for asking the right questions before we actually start, rather than just proving success. Because we think of that as a new concept too sometimes, and actually it isn't. If you go back and look what Arthur Page was doing when he was at AT&T in the 1920s, that's exactly the approach that he took then. And it's rather frustrating that kind of 100 years later, we're kind of reinventing the wheel of a lot of these things. And we're actually kind of trying to do things that we have done in the past. And I think for me, the big stumbling block and where public relations and communications became corrupted, perverted, was in the 1950s and the 1960s, because it's that time that kind of mass media came to the forefront. And I think we as public relations and communications professionals forgot that we were a channel neutral discipline. And we thought it was all about media relations, and that's where the emphasis became. Hence the reason we started to do things like the dreaded AVEs. And then we can kind of move on, and we began to see specialist measurement firms being established. Way back in 1996, AMEC was originally founded. And then we've had the various iterations of the Barcelona principles, kind of every 5 years, we've seen an update. And to me, I find it so frustrating because when the first Barcelona principles came out in 2010, I was really excited by the idea. And then I read them and I thought about them, and I was so disappointed because it was a statement of the obvious. It was a statement of things that we should already know, that actually people have been doing in the past. But as a profession, we were so far behind that we weren't all embracing this. So the question we've got to ask is, why, if we've been measuring and evaluating for so long, have we made so little progress? You know, there are robust frameworks in place, there are playbooks, there are toolkits, there's all sorts of kind of things that we can do. So that's the first question. The second one is, why is the way that we're measuring not of major or significant interest to the CEO and the C-suite? And I think one of the things we need to do is we need to dispel the ROI myth. You know, there's actually robust academic research out there that shows that senior leaders understand that not all PR work or other functions like HR and legal are always amenable to precise measurement. So we've got to actually think, if we're using data and we're using measurement, why are we using it? What's the value in it? And maybe leaders are asking communications and PR people questions about ROI because we're not helping them to ask the right questions. And I think that's what we need to be doing. We need to kind of, you know, even today, we're still too focused on outputs, and we need to help the kind of the leadership team to think about what we do in a different way. And if we go back and actually look at what we're doing today, you know, where does the approach that we take, where did it come from? And actually, that's rooted in academic theory as well. You know, if we look in the 1970s and the 1980s, you know, that's when things like the Kellogg Foundation model was developed. You know, based on kind of the, evaluation based on the theory of change and program theory and program logic models. And all of these emerged out of public administration in the 70s and 80s. You know, and you can see there the kind of the sort of classic Kellogg model that I put up on the screen, which is kind of breaking down programs into 5 stages. And you can find others that maybe break it down into kind of 7 stages, where things like the outcomes, we might be doing things like looking at the short, the medium, and the long-term ones, but they're all kind of following the same basic structure. And that's kind of how we're developing our kind of measurement frameworks today. And then if we kind of look at kind of, you know, where they come from, you know, they've got the, you know, they've got the same roots, they've got the same approach. You know, it's about kind of defining the logic. It's the whole kind of SMART objectives. And I think that's one of the things I often found so frustrating is, you know, in my kind of introduction, is one of the things I do is I help clients to modernize and review their public relations and communication strategy. Actually, I don't. On the whole, I don't do that. Because the reality is, when I go into lots of organizations, they don't have a strategy for me to review. They don't actually have clearly defined communications objectives that are tied to business objectives. Really simple and basic things that so many organizations just don't do. And then if we kind of follow on this kind of, you know, the logic model and look at what the stages should be, the formative, you know, why aren't we doing that kind of insight stage? You know, why aren't we doing all of that in that thinking right at the start? And I think one of the things that's kind of so frustrating is if you look at things like how the advertising industry works, every single ad agency has a function called a planner, a planning department. Yet so often in communications, we skip that vital stage and we don't use the insight. We don't use the data right at the start when we should be using it. And we focus too much on the bit at the end. It's all about, instead of kind of looking at kind of what should we do and how can we do what we're doing better, which to me are the 2 most important things, it's all about how can we prove how clever we are? How can we prove our success? Actually, if we forget about that for a moment and focus on the first two, about using insight and about using improvement, then that bit about proving the success at the end is going to be better by default, because what we've done is better. But we're too obsessed with kind of that proof point at the end. So, where does this kind of the Kellogg model, where did it take us? Well, actually, if we look at some of the models that we're using as practitioners today, you'll see those kind of familiar stages in just about all of the models that are out there at the moment. So if we look at this one from the European Commission, that was kind of created, back in 2015, you can see this, those stages there that we're going to be taken through. And you kind of move on, and we look at the kind of the UK government communication service model, and you can see those same familiar steps there. We have our inputs, we have our outputs, our outtakes, our outcomes, and our impact. And another model from the UK government communication service, the kind of Oasis planning model. I always personally struggle with this one, even though I've actually run training sessions on behalf of GCS using it. I can never remember what the S stands for, because they've got this lovely kind of Oasis, but you've got to really think that the S stands for scoring. So without the graphic in front of me, I often struggle with that one. And then, of course, the one that we should all be familiar with, which is kind of the AMEC integrated evaluation framework. And then when that came out in 2016, everybody was kind of, whoa, this is great, this is fantastic, this is the way we should be doing it. But let's just stop for a minute and think, is it really so new? Should we really be getting so excited about that? Shouldn't it actually have been what we were already doing? And sure enough, actually, if you look, some of this thinking had been developed years earlier. There was something called the PR effectiveness yardstick, that was developed in kind of 1993 by Dr. Walter Lindenman, and it had its kind of different levels of measurement. At level 1, it had its kind of outgrowths, and then at the second one, you had kind of the intermediary metrics, such as awareness and comprehension. But then we had to kind of move on and think, okay, so what was the impact of that? And everything that we're doing at the moment in measurement, or most things that we're doing, is still very focused on this kind of program logic thinking. And I think one of the problems is that although kind of the C-suite understands the concept of these models, too often the content that we put on in it is alien to them. It's things like opportunity to see, clicks, engagement, reach, and kind of things that are fairly meaningless. So what we're going to ask ourselves is, what happens next? Where should we be taking communications, measurement, and evaluation in the future? And also public relations, communication, measurement, and evaluation, because I would define those two things differently. Because to me, public relations is about an organization's behavior, the things that it does. So how do we begin to kind of look at kind of doing things like measuring relationships? Because actually, relationships are what gives an organization its license to operate. Every organization needs those relationships in order to be able to function. And if public relations people are responsible for kind of improving those, then how are we going to measure them? What insight can we get on them? How do we know whether it's working? And management thinking has moved on from the 1970s and 80s when these program logic models were developed. But how far have we moved on? Because some of these ones I've just shown you, the EC one from 2015, AMEC from 2016, these are from the last 5 or 6 years. And this is what we're presenting as new, when actually the world that we're operating around us has moved on. So I think what we need to be focusing on is we need to ask ourselves the question, what do leaders actually want? How can we create value for them? And there's been some research by kind of Professor Jim McNamara in Australia. And one of the things he's saying by talking to leaders is that they're far more likely to pay for what they do not know that can help them to change the future. And that's one of the areas we as professionals could be focusing on. We've got to ask ourselves questions is, what does an organization need to do to maintain its legitimacy and thrive? How does it know that it's achieved its objectives, not just internally, but its accountabilities to the wider society? And things like our traditional way of approaching measurement doesn't do that. You know, the Business Roundtable has published its new purpose of a corporation in 2019. And that's saying that no longer are businesses just responsible to shareholders, they're responsible to all of their stakeholders. We need to start building some of that into the things that we're doing today. And we need to focus on how we can really help leaders to build for the future. And actually, what can we do to use measurement, data, analytics, and to add real value to the organization? So that's where I see the future of communication and public relations measurement and evaluation. And look forward to discussing it with everybody later. So thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Stuart, for taking us there through a little bit of history and onward into the future of measurement and evaluation. One of the, I think, keynotes that you finished on was this top management perspective on measurement and evaluation and the challenge of making communication measurement meet the needs of corporate management, right? So, and on that topic, I think we have a perfectly suited next presentation by Katrine Torp from the Norwegian, from the Research Council of Norway. Katrine is the Executive Vice President for Communications and User Experience at the Research Council of Norway, and a long-time avid proponent of evidence-based communications practice, communications management. I think the very first conversation Katrine and I had years ago here in Norway when I came 5 years ago to Oslo was one on measurement and evaluation, and we haven't stopped talking about this topic since. And I think also Katrine is perfectly suited also to correspond with her presentation now to one of the latest questions we've gotten in the Q&A. An anonymous participant has asked, let's say you have an organization that is immature in communication measurement, either leaders or co-workers. What can we actually do, and what's a good approach to improve maturity? And I think that's exactly your topic, not just because you have an emphasis on building maturity, but also on building maturity in this leader co-worker relationship, right? Using measurement also as a tool to move a team along a measurement maturity journey. So over to you, Katrine. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's right that we have been discussing relevant metrics for communication for a big number of years. And the task that you gave me for this session today was actually to talk about the measurement journey in the Research Council of Norway. I will share with you just a few perspectives about where we started and where we are coming from. So bear with me. Can you see my slides now? It's always very difficult. Is it okay? No?
I'm not seeing the slides yet.
You're not
Katrine?
seeing the slides. Maybe I should do share screen.
There we go. It's
There
coming
we
up
go.
now. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. All right. So how to implement a state-of-the-art measurement framework. Now, Stuart just said that AMEC wasn't state-of-the-art, but I will challenge that a little bit. I just want to take you through the journey that we've been through for the past 3 years. I think that our first step in the Research Council was actually to invest in measuring stakeholders' perception, how they view us, what was the drivers for those perception, what did they expect from us, where did we come short of their expectations, and also do data collection and kind of verify if our channels, do they actually reach the people we want to reach or not. And then I have a team of very enthusiastic and knowledgeable people working in communication and user journey and data-driven communication. And we started discussing what kind of system should we choose, what kind of framework should we choose for planning and measurement. And actually, we took quite some time to discuss this first step. And we discussed a big variety of various models, and we ended up with a full Amex scheme. Because that starts with the objectives of the organization, and then our role is to find a kind of really pertinent and interesting communication goals, like how can we make local communities use research more to develop, healthcare or whatever. And those are the kind of targets we have currently. And we also put in place a systematic, both quantitative and qualitative insights and surveys that we run now habitually, and we use the results. We use the result to improve our communications, and we use the results to improve other parts of our business as well. And what has helped a lot of us when we're talking with leaders in the organization, we have real-time dashboards on a lot of topics. So they come to us and say, well, we want a webinar. Oh, do you really? What do you want to achieve? Who do you want to talk to? What do you want them to think afterwards? And then we can have a very informed and data-driven discussion with them. And that has helped us a lot. But internally in comms, what we did, we were very enthusiastic about AMEC, and we had a lot of AMEC cards, like one for every second employee or something. And we had 64 metrics, and we tried to educate the organization, the rest of the organization, about all the things we were measuring. So now in our third year, and I hope we are now at what Sunita talked about, kind of between committed and optimized, we are slimming down on the number of metrics. We are trying to regroup and have fewer full AMEC boards, measure fewer things, more in depth, and making sure that it's relevant. And what I think it's quite, I'm very happy to see that most people find that our metrics are motivating, and the fact that we measure, we set clear targets and we measure if we reach them, they find it motivating and they feel personal ownership, and more so than they did a few years ago. But I think that what's the most important thing, and I think Stuart also touched upon that. One of the qualitative comments I got when I run a small survey internally, I see it helps us do more of the right things and less of the wrong things, which is a very simple statement, but it's very true. And the key issue is, does it really create an impact? Does it really help us help the organization achieve its targets? One of the things that they have said is that everyone actually agree that it gives us a background to give leaders better advice on the right measures. And we can give those advice based on quantitative insights. And also another element that might sound self-serving is that communication area has become more respected internally. Well, we need that respect in order for people to listen to our advice. So that's also important. And lastly, the contribution that communication and all the efforts and campaigns and activities we have actually helps the Regional Council achieve its objectives. That has become much clearer now with a very systematic approach to planning and measurement. So I'm not sure we are entirely where Stuart would want us to be in terms of measurement maturity, and I don't think all our metrics are perfect or our plans are perfect, but I think we are at a good path. And we are also now working more and more with the entire organization to try to make them take ownership. All right, our reputation has dropped in stakeholder group ABC, and we think it's because of this. What can we do to address that proactively? So I hope I've been able to give you a small flavor.
Thank you, Katrine. Yeah, that was indeed very flavorful. And I'd be curious to hear more in the future about how you can now use measurement and evaluation really to get in touch with other functions and lead a conversation around data, about KPIs, also outside of communications, and how that continues growing and maturing your own measurement approach, and maybe also impacting other parts of the organization. Excellent. Thank you so much. Next with us, excuse me, we have Kia Haring joining us from Finland. Kia is the Vice President for Global Communications and Sustainability at T2 Every, which is one of the largest IT service providers in Europe. And when I was looking around for practitioner insights for today's webinar, talking to a couple of people in the Finnish Communications Association, their CEO there and a couple of members, I think all of them brought up Kia's name when I was voicing my intent of putting together a webinar on measurement. So I think all roads, at least in Finland, lead to you, Kia, when it comes to this topic. And we're very excited to hear about your journey towards developing your own approach and method to data-driven reputation building, something I think you call the reputation capital value tree. So something very organizationally fitted, right? We recently had a question on the Q&A following Stuart's presentation exactly on this topic. Stuart talked a lot about standardization and how that is important. And one of the viewers felt that there was a tension between how individual organizations are and these attempts for standards, but at the same time, having a need to really develop a measurement approach inside the organization itself. So I think for that, your next presentation here will be right on point. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your insights.
Thank you, and hello everyone. Good afternoon on behalf of me as well. So Tietoevry is a digital services company originating from the Nordics, and it is exactly 2 years ago that we went through a major merger with one of our actually Norwegian competitors at that time, and today we are Tietoevry. So of course, technology industry is a very dynamic field in general, and this company, I come from former Tietos side, has gone through a huge transformation during the past 10 years. And actually it is during this transformation that we have been creating the role for the communications in the company. And what you see here, so after a phase of restructuring and rethinking of our business, we turned into a growth path. And this is how we define the roles for communications, but also marketing around this growth agenda. And of course, we work inside out as always, and the role for communication is to build trust across the wide stakeholder audiences. So we work internally in order to boost the right kind of culture and get our ambassadors active in sharing the good news, what the company is doing. But we also build the reputation and reposition the company across the wide audiences and utilizing media as an efficient vehicle to that. We work very closely with our colleagues in marketing who are then more into the customer experience part and naturally the lead generation. But as we use common channels, the company channels, both of us, we are developing a more holistic view how to measure the impact of our activities, both short-term and long-term, and what kind of insights can the data give us to guide and optimize our activities going forward. But let me focus here on the communication part. So this is now how the success looks like for us today. So as already mentioned, the challenge we started to solve was company reputation. And we decided to use media because media was oftentimes writing negative stories about that, and which had a huge impact on the large audience. So we worked through media. We started initially to measure the amount of positive articles, but also the positive value created by that publicity value. But today we are more into, of course, looking at the quality, looking at the reach of the articles, but more and more focusing on the quality. Are we appearing in the news with the right type of topics that are supporting us on our strategic path? We are also looking into the engagement part here, referring to the social media. And what is the new KPI for us is the inbound requests. So how many journalists, for instance, connect with us proactively to ask for opinion, or if we are asked to speak in the seminar like this, so that will also be noted. Let me show the capital, reputation capital value tree, and this has been created in-house. I recruited an expert on this, our senior PR manager, Jukka Mäntyjärvi, hopefully there in the audience today. So this is how we look at things today. So of course, quantity of the visibility, how many hits, earned media here referring to the traditional media, both print and digital, and shared media referring to social media. So hits and the reach that we can get through these hits. But if you then focus on the quality side, so the similar split between the earned, the traditional media, and shared, the social media. But here the focus is very much on the amount of positive or neutral visibility, but also if we are in the right media context, in the right medias overall. So we have defined the tier 1 media across the Nordic countries, what is included in that. And thematic ownership means exactly that, are we engaging with the right type of articles? Are we standing out for the right type of topics that are supporting to build the reputation on the areas we want to have it? So taking very much this qualitative approach, and through this we are following on the quality along with the quantity of our visibility on a quarterly basis. And here is a type of report per country that I will go through with our management on a quarterly basis. We are following this naturally campaign-wise. We even get the peaks on the monthly level. But what we have realized is actually that you need a quarter to be able to judge whether it has been a sort of good visibility, what are the main drivers in the different channels for that, and what are the other learning points. Obviously, we are a listed company, so stock market related notices, they come along always, but you can now more clearly specify that what has been the impact of our proactive activities, working together with our spokespersons, connecting with the media, offering them the newsworthy angles on the topics we have selected on our own, etc. We can also follow whether our press releases are working or not, and that has been one of the very concrete insights. They don't work on all topics and in all countries, and a global organization like ours spends hours in doing press releases in many cases on 4 different languages. So is it really worthwhile, or should we focus on finding the new angle, training the speakers, and going to the media with that? So this is where we are today, and we are actually developing a similar approach to cover our internal communication and internal channels, internal employee engagement, and the likes. So maybe I stop here at this point.
Thank you so much for your insights there, Kia. And I think it's a great example for taking something that often is approached very broad stroke based on standardized tools that aren't bad, but that are not very organization specific, to really turning that from its head on its feet and developing it from the organizational perspective from the ground up. Thank you so much for sharing that. We will continue from our English-speaking countries over to, now we've had 2 Nordic perspectives from Norway and Finland, over to the German-speaking region. We're moving over to Stephan Hufnagel from Germany. Stephan leads a boutique consulting agency that focuses on measurement, on ratings, called Rate, and working out of Frankfurt. And the way I've come to know Stephan, is actually online via a podcast that he runs together with another strong advocate in the German language region for measurement, Marc-Steffen Büchele, and discussing since I think 2 years now or so, more or less, different perspectives on measurement and evaluation, being very practice oriented and very applied, trying to get into some of the sort of best practice things that communicators can do in different size and different types of organizations to move measurement and evaluation along. And today, Stephan is here to present some learnings that he gathered together with Mark Stephan from all of these conversations, present some principles that he derived out of those conversations with practitioners over these 2 years. Stephan, looking very much forward to your learnings from that.
Wonderful. I share my slides. I hope you can see them. Are they visible?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Super. So yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction and the short presentations of all my colleagues before me. This was very inspiring, and I think we will have a very exciting and stimulus discussion afterwards. As Alex already said, what I would like to do is close this round with a presentation of 7 principles for successful measurement and evaluation of communications. And these were derived from expert interviews that we conducted as part of the podcast series that you just mentioned. It's not surprising that although none of the speakers here today were on this podcast, that the principles sound very much like what we've heard today. But let me go through them with you. So let me start with introducing the podcast to you. It's called Measurement Mashup. It's focused on evaluation and impact assessment of communication and public relations. My co-host, Stephan Hufnagel, and I started this podcast in March 2020. Mark and I, we met at the working group of the International Controller Association, ICV, and we worked intensively on the topic of communication performance measurement. But despite the fact that considerable progress has been made in terms of methods and tools, we had to conclude from discussions with companies that while they invest considerable amounts of money in running communication campaigns, very rarely they invest the time to measure the impact of their activities. It's too complex, it's too expensive, too vague. There are a lot of concerns that communication managers have to voice against measuring communication. And so evaluation still seems to be a stepchild of communications. And there's only a few companies who really stand out or even present publicly what they're doing. So Mark and I, we were convinced that it's not only possible to assess the success of internal and external communications, but that it's also extremely useful and even necessary to address the challenges that comms managers are facing. We need to build the bridges. We heard that from Sunita to top management. And to do that, we need to speak their language. We need to go beyond clicks and likes, and create a context of what we're doing to what's relevant to them, the business objectives. We have recorded 14 episodes in the past. 5 of them were in English, 9 in German. We'll move to the English-speaking episodes more and more. So feel free to check out our website there. The German episodes are summarized in English, so you can still participate in the discussion there. What we are trying to accomplish here, Mark and I, is, and you see this here in blue, is basically to show that measuring and evaluation of the impact of communication doesn't need to be complicated. You can start simple. It can be simple. You don't need to be a data scientist or a rocket scientist to do that. You can do simple steps. There's lots of tools that you can use, and that's what we wanted to show in this podcast. This is like an overview of the topics that we covered in the first season. We're now in season 2. So the first season, we started off very simple, talking about what is comms controlling or comms performance measurement, why it's important, why it's important is continuously growing. And then we spent time to dig into topics like dashboards, reporting to C-suite, focus groups, artificial intelligence, reputation management. We always try to give practical examples and to be actionable with in the discussions. So episodes 6 and 7 and 8 contain some very practical experience from comms experts who often started small, but then built over time very successful measurement programs in their organizations. So these are the 7 principles that I promised to introduce you to. And it starts, as you would have expected, probably with the question of measurable goals or objectives. And this was really like a mantra in all of the episodes that we recorded, that always everybody mentioned this as an important topic. And why did they mention it? They mentioned it because like most organizations are not there yet. Most organizations don't start with the objectives, but they think about the activities first. The goal is never to reach high number of visits or likes. There's always something that you want to accomplish beyond that with comms activities that has to do with perception or behavior. And this is something that is usually not very well defined. It's very defined when there is a purchase decision at the end of the funnel, of the communication funnel. Then it seems to be in place. But in all other projects that we've seen, companies didn't spend enough time to define what it is that they actually want to achieve. And this, of course, then has an impact on principle number 2, report in a goal-oriented way to convince top management of the success of your communication work and of the impact that you can have with it. You need to speak their language. You need to put the data that you collect into context of relevant business goals, and you have to focus on what really matters to them. Dashboards are a great way, but often show only the what, but not the how, the why, and what next, meaning the actions we should draw from the data. So dashboards in that sense can be very dangerous. In principle 3, we show that you can start pragmatically with pilots. We've seen this especially from the practice-oriented episodes, that measurement projects don't have to be complicated and often don't need expensive tools. We talked to communication experts who weren't measurement experts in the beginning. They started with Excel, a clear goal of what they wanted to measure, started measuring small parts of larger projects, and then continuously established measurement in the team. The AMEC, but also other associations offer multiple tools, most of them for free. The measurement maturity mapper can help you to learn where you are in the measurement journey and what next steps could be. The integrated evaluation framework and other frameworks can show you what level of measurement you need to consider and help you to align your measurement activities to your targets, or to keep the targets always in mind when you define the KPIs for each of the steps. It's important, and that is also an outcome of the practice-oriented episodes, to continuously evaluate your approaches in order to improve them over time. You need to create space for the whole team to discuss the results, how you've gotten there, and what they mean. And this brings us to the next principle. It's principle number 5. Because discussing the data with your team and other colleagues in your organization might help you to identify additional data sources that you can use to combine your data with, or to compare it with, which then leads to more insights and can also create more relevance for other internal stakeholders when they see that their data is reflected in your measurement approach. Important here is also to make your assumptions, the assumptions that you make about communication activities and how they work, visible and falsify them. Communicators tend to assume that that the goal of a campaign primarily is to create media publicity, because when the message appears in the media, somebody will see it and then absorb the message, form a better opinion, and that will then benefit the cause. Based on this assumption, the communicator's job should be over when the communication is in the media. But is that really the case? Did people really understand the messages, or did it just appear in the media but didn't have an effect on the target audiences? So that's something that needs to be falsified and seen. Principle 6 argues for combining different methods, not only to understand the what that I just mentioned, but also the why and what now. The experts that we interviewed see a clear advantage for combining qualitative with quantitative measures. AI can be a good solution for that, measuring both, but often interviews, focus groups, manual coding might be required to get real insights. And then the last principle that I want to touch upon is to involve your employees. There is a difference between, obviously, the maturity level that you see in external communications and in internal communications. But the days where internal communications can be neglected as the little sister of external comms, they're basically gone. Employees are stakeholders with a great interest in the company, and they can contribute massively to the company's success if they are informed properly. In addition, specific insights can be derived from within the organization, often complementing the external data in a very meaningful and high quality way. Organizations often shy away from having real conversations with their employees on internal channels because the role of internal channels is often defined as, spreading happy news, showing how everything is working well. This needs to change if companies don't want to get into a situation where LinkedIn or Glassdoor is the sources where they can learn what employees really think. So these were the principles. Thank you very much for listening. I hope we will have a great discussion. Here's some things you can do after this discussion here. Go to our website, maybe listen to our podcast. We also have the principles summarized in a white paper that I'm happy to share with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephan. And just for everybody who's listening now, we've officially timed this for an hour, which will give us 3 minutes remaining, but we'll go a bit over in order to cover a couple of the remaining questions. A lot of them have been answered in writing already by our panelists as we were going through the different presentations, but we certainly want to address some of the remaining ones. And for everybody who needs to go into the next meeting at the full hour, we are recording this, so please then review the discussion later as we will upload the video. So something that I would like to, to enter into the discussion with is this this point of simplicity. And I think it's kind of a contentious point because yes, entering can be and should be simple, but if we look at actual approaches taken by some of the thought-leading comms directors that we see, some of them here with us today, Katrine, Kia, things from the beginning already look quite complex. And one of the questions that was coming in was that was addressing the point that certainly even if you start complex by opening up all these different ways for measuring together with your team, at a certain point, Katrine, you've mentioned that you've significantly reduced the numbers of measures, of perspectives you were taking, and then deciding on a reduced number where you allowed yourself to then dig deeper and work more with. And the question was, how did you achieve that? So how did that process go, that refining, that clustering of criteria maybe, and how did you achieve that?
I think many of the speakers have already touched upon it. It's a question of maturity. You actually need to use it and to gain some experience, and then you see that, well, it didn't give me insight. It didn't give me a broader understanding. It didn't help direct my priorities. And we now have integrated dashboards where you can see media, social media, web, etc., all together. And suddenly you start seeing patterns and you start understanding, well, the key driver, and the key driver might be differently this year than last year. Now we've been in this situation, so our key focus should be A, and then we work on that and nothing else.
Thank you so much, Katrine, for elaborating on that. Over to you, Kia, with another question on your approach. So what, from all of this was very elaborate. It was in a very short time, a quite dense presentation on your broad approach. But if you had to say what was really essential to building that data-driven approach in communications, what does it boil down to?
I think if I just reflect where we started, so we started by crystallizing that what is the challenge we want to solve, what is the role of communication in contributing to the business success, and started from that, and of course then that what are the essential KPIs, both from the internal and external perspective. Having the current state analysis, where are we now, where can we put the bar, and then, well, short-term actions can be measured, but I think here the longer-term trend has been the one most important, which has also carried on, or why we have been carried on developing the measurement, is that you start seeing impact that you can use when optimizing your operations going forward. So that is maybe one view that I would like to highlight.
Thank you, Kia, for that. For another question that I want to pick up from the Q&A that followed from Stephan's presentation, but maybe it's also a question to Sunita's more bird's eye perspective on data, is that of the need to include some element of continuous learning, and potentially also for the function, communication, or otherwise, to use data to educate their C-suite. And so the question to you maybe, Sunita, is from your experience, what facilitates this relationship and what helps maybe also this kind of function to management education about the management approach and getting buy-in, not just from your own team, as Katrine spent a lot of time on discussing her successes there, but buy-in from the C-suite in a function-specific approach to data and to learning.
Yes, no, that's a great question. And I come back to what I mentioned earlier. The leaders, they see the value if it's helping them make a decision, if it's helping them see an insight that they could not see, that could have been in their blind spot. So always find out what are the leaders what are the questions they have for the business, and take one of them, take one question and prove it, use the value and learning. So the learning is not, bring them into a classroom and tell them why data is important. That will not work, because they have to see the value from data, and the value they will see is if you give them an insight that they were not thinking about, or you give them an answer or a different perspective that they were not thinking about, but it addresses their questions. See, they are looking at the business and they have questions. Almost all leaders have questions about the business that they want to answer. So I think, think from their perspective and prove it through your work is one. And I say this to all PR comms friends that, you may not be in the business of data, but data is in your business. So make it a friend and work with it as a friend to answer. You're not fighting with it. You are learning through it and you're helping the business. So start with the question. It would be my answer.
Yes, this is so much. And if I may ask
yes,
to this,
sure, go ahead.
I think communications departments have a excellent opportunity right now with the world being so dynamic and agile. And if we're looking at the stakeholder landscape, I mean, most companies are now ESG driven, and it is pretty clear that ESG has to do with stakeholder perceptions and how they differ. And who else than the comms department could help the C-suite to understand how the different views of the stakeholder groups are. So I think there is an opportunity here. We need to create relevance, as Sunita mentioned. It's not about educating them about our approaches and why they should think that what we're doing is relevant, but to really see what the problems are that they have, and then try to find ways of how we can support their challenges with the data that we can collect.
Yeah, just to kind of reinforce what Stephan said, I think too often we get kind of lost in the weeds of measurement and data. And there are different types of data, different types of metrics are used for different purposes. So, for example, I loved one of the phrases that Stephan used when he said dashboards can be dangerous. because that's exactly kind of chimes with my thinking, is dashboards can be incredibly powerful for us as a communications team, because we can use them to adjust course, to improve performance, to see how we're doing, and things like that. But for reporting upwards, for actually using with the C-suite, or for having that conversation with the chief executive, then probably not. A dashboard approach isn't usually the route I would take. I would want to kind of go back more to kind of some of the things that Sunita was talking about kind of the data storytelling. You want to boil it down to something that's really simple, that can be grasped really quickly, and is ultra relevant to the business and the objectives that they're working towards. And there's never going to be one answer to that. You know, you might be having a conversation 1 month with them because that's the most important issue. Your conversation the following month might be about something else, because the landscape has changed. And I think too often we focus too much on the kind of the numbers of the data, rather than the actual meaning behind it, which to me is the important part of it.
Yes, Katrina, you have your hand up. You want to chime in there? Go ahead.
Yeah, it was just about what kind of metrics might be seen as relevant. You know, for us, we have applicants. How do they feel about, where do they find the information? Do they find the information they need? Do they get the service they need? Do they feel that we are delivering what they expect? That's the kind of metrics that we use upwards and into the organization. And those are relevant. And I totally agree that dashboards with, you know, click and opening rates and stuff like that is it for internally for communication people.
Thank you. One topic that I'd like to raise that is has also been brought up by a question. I think it followed Kia's presentation, but I think it's equally a question both for Katrina and Kia, for both our comms directors in developing their approach. It was a question about systems and tools. So to what degree were ready-made digital approaches, digital systems used? To which degree are they used? I think it's also an interesting question, because from the perspective of research, we've been recently discussing this explosion of digital tools, not just in marketing technology, MarTech, but also now in ComTech, as a kind of two-edged sword. So on the one hand, there's a lot of opportunity there for additional insights and new approaches, but at the same time, we're also seeing that comms professionals sometimes give up a lot of agency to these tools, and I think it'll be interesting to hear from both of you how you experience that world, how it complements what you're doing, how maybe some tools that you've worked with have been conflicting with your approach, and that part of the journey with digital tools. Who wants to go first?
If I start, so I come from a digital company, technology company, so of course we are creating our own tools. No, but we certainly, one can use the data sources, and that is what we are using as well. I mean, we use external provider for sharing our press releases that comes along with a certain analytics. We use Google Analytics, we use Meltwater for media, social media follow-up and analysis, but connecting these and automating so that we get insight. So that has taken place within the company for us.
We are also using a big number of various tools, and the challenge is to try to bring them together. And for now, we're using Power BI, which easily kind of visualize data from different sources. And Google Analytics, of course, is part of that. And we're working our way through a more integrated approach and one kind of more CRM type of system. Microsoft Dynamics is what we're working towards. But it is yes, it's a patchy area of a lot of different sources and a lot of different systems, and we try to bring it together. And we also have the perceptions studies, which we do by an external agency. And we try to combine the data from that with, for example, media relations or social media sentiment and reach.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Seeing the time and that we've already gone a bit over, I think it's time to wrap up a bit. I think this discussion about tools is certainly one to continue as this market also grows rapidly, right? And evaluating, maybe having standards to also assess how valuable these tools are for communication and communication measurement and evaluation. And while as Sunita said, you might not be in the business of data, but data is in your business, so you're forced to do this. But the first step should maybe not be to a already ready-made tool, because to use another claim, a fool with a tool is still a fool. We've heard that a lot in the measurement environment as well. So continuous learning, that has been stressed as well, can help with that. The webinar today was all about that. It was about learning, part of Measurement Month as a educational initiative around measurement and evaluation. I hope we've contributed to that conversation in this November Measurement Month. I want to use the opportunity to thank everybody who joined us today for giving us their time and listening to all of our perspectives here today. Thank the panelists for providing these exciting state-of-the-art insights into the discussion of measurement and evaluation. And I also want to, of course, personally thank our corporate and academic partners of the Nordic Alliance for Communication and Management, who allow us to do these webinars and to approach our research at the intersection of communication practice and academia. So I hope you'll be with us for future events. There's more coming. There's certainly a couple more Measurement Month events that I encourage you to check out on the AMEC website. And with no further ado, let me close this session and wish you all a good rest of the day. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.